It was the spring of 2018, and our middle school class was buzzing with excitement. We were heading out on a field trip to a sprawling forest known for its hiking trails and serene environment. For many of us, it was a welcome escape from the monotony of classroom lectures. The bus ride was filled with laughter and chatter. Upon arriving, we were greeted by the sight of towering trees and the fresh scent of pine in the air. Our teachers divided us into smaller groups, each accompanied by a chaperone, to explore different trails. My group consisted of 5 classmates and Mr. Thompson, our history teacher. We set off on a trail, a moderate hike that was supposed to lead us to a beautiful clearing perfect for lunch. The trail was well marked, and the forest seemed alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. We were all in high spirits, snapping photos and joking around. About an hour into our hike, we stumbled upon something odd. A tree trunk bore deep, fresh claw marks. Mr. Thompson speculated it might be from a bear, reminding us to stay close and remain vigilant. The mood shifted slightly, but we pressed on, dismissing it as a minor scare. Further along, we entered a clearing and discovered an abandoned campsite. The tent was collapsed, and belongings were strewn about, as if someone had left in a hurry. An eerie silence set in the area, and a sense of unease settled over us. Mr. Thompson decided it was best to turn back, but when he saw the map, his expression changed. We had taken a wrong turn and strayed off the designated trail. The realization that we were lost increased anxiety within the group. Mr. Thompson tried to reassure us, but the uncertainty in his voice was unmistakable. As we retraced our steps, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia, but then I caught glimpses of a shadowy figure in my vision. Every time I turned to look, it vanished. I wasn't the only one who noticed. Whispers among my classmates confirmed we were not alone. We had no cell service, and the dense canopy blocked any view of the sky, making it impossible to navigate by the stars. Mr. Thompson urged us to remain calm and conserve our flashlight batteries, but the tension was increasing. Suddenly, a rustling noise erupted from the bushes, and before we could react, one of our classmates, Jenny's voice, came from the darkness. Her scream echoed through the forest, then suddenly stopped. We got scared, unsure of what to do. Mr. Thompson shouted for us to run, and we bolted blindly through the forest, branches whipping at our faces. We stumbled upon an old abandoned cabin. It looked like something out of a nightmare. Weathered, forgotten, its wooden planks warped and covered in moss. With no other options, we rushed inside, slamming the door behind us. Inside, the air was thick with dust and something else, something rotten. The place had clearly been abandoned for years, but there were strange signs of recent activity. A lantern sat on a table, its wick still slightly blackened. A half-eaten meal had long since turned to mold, and then the rocking chair. It creaked slowly, back and forth, but no one was sitting in it. As we searched for anything useful, I found an old map pinned to the wall. At first, it seemed normal, just the layout of the forest. But then I noticed the red markings. Names. Dozens of names. Some had been crossed out. Below the map, a bunch of photographs showed groups of kids. My stomach dropped when I realized some of them had the same school uniforms as us. Suddenly it dawned at us. We should leave now. We ran. We didn't think, we didn't scream, we just ran. Just as we thought we were lost forever, we burst out onto a road. And there it was, our bus. The driver had been searching for us, worried we hadn't returned. We screamed for him to open the doors, and he barely had time to react before we got inside. As the bus pulled away, I finally allowed myself to look back. For a moment, all I saw was darkness, then movement, a figure, standing just beyond the tree line, watching, not moving, not following, just waiting. A few years ago, I took a group of kids on a hiking trip. We were going up a mountain. It was deep in the forest, far from any roads. There were 8 kids, 1 other adult and me. The kids were having fun, talking and laughing as we walked. After a long hike, we reached the top of the mountain. We set up our tents and made a small fire. The view was beautiful and the moon was full. The kids were tired and went to sleep early. I decided to sleep in my hammock, outside under the trees. I was lying in my hammock, reading a book. It was quiet except for the sounds of the forest. Then I saw something moving on the trail. It was a man walking toward our camp. He had no flashlight and no backpack. That was strange because we were so far from the road. The man kept walking until he reached our camp. He didn't say anything. He just stopped and stood there. I didn't move. My heart was beating fast. Then he slowly sat down by a tree. He wasn't resting. He was watching us. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to wake the kids and scare them, so I stayed quiet and watched. The man sat there for hours. At around 3:30 a.m., he finally stood up. He looked at us one last time, then walked back down the trail. The next morning, the kids were happy and full of energy. They didn't know anything was wrong. I didn't tell them about the man, but all day I felt strange, like we were still being watched. Even now, I think about that night. Who was that man? Why was he out there alone? What did he want? I don't have the answers, but I know one thing. Sometimes the scariest thing in the woods isn't an animal, it's another person. When I was in high school, our history class went on a field trip to an old abandoned factory. It was supposed to be an educational trip, something about learning the history of the workers who had once worked there. But when we arrived, the place looked more like a haunted house than a historical site. The brick walls were cracked and the windows broken. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and every step kicked up tiny clouds of dirt. We walked through giant halls filled with rusted machines. Our tour guide, an old man with a deep voice, told us stories about how this factory had once been full of life, workers moving fast, machines roaring. But now, all that was left was silence. As we walked deeper inside, something caught my eye. In the far corner of the room, almost hidden behind a pile of old crates, was a metal door slightly ajar. It was rusted and looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Everyone else was busy listening to the guide, but I couldn't stop staring at that door. I took a few steps forward and gently pushed the door open. It let out a long, slow creak. Behind it was a narrow tunnel, the walls damp and covered in grime. A cold draft made me shiver. I wanted to explore. The tunnel led to a small room. There was a single flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. In the middle of the room was a chair with straps on the arms and legs. Around it, old papers were scattered, some of them yellowed with age. I picked one up, but the words were unreadable. As I stood there, the silence was broken. At first, it was faint, just the sound of soft breathing. Then footsteps, slow, heavy, coming from the tunnel. My stomach dropped. I turned around and saw a shadowy figure stood at the entrance of the tunnel, blocking my way back. I wanted to run, I wanted to scream, but my body wouldn't move. The figure just stood there watching. The air felt heavy. Then, in a slow, unnatural movement, it took a step forward. Something inside me finally snapped. I bolted. I ran straight toward the figure, not thinking, just moving. As I got closer, the figure stepped aside. It didn't reach for me. It didn't follow. It just let me go. I ran through the tunnel and back into the main hall. My classmates were still there, laughing and talking. No one had noticed I was gone. I never told anyone what happened, but I know what I saw. Later, I searched online for anything about that tunnel. I found nothing. A year later, they demolished the factory. No records, no reports. Just gone. But I still think about that tunnel and the figure that let me leave.